What Alexandra Winters heard through the thin walls of the Meridian Tower's emergency stairwell would shatter everything she thought she knew about being a mother. A stranger's gentle lullaby, sung to her own daughter during a panic attack, would expose the devastating truth about the empire she'd built at the cost of the one person who mattered most. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of Meridian Tower hummed with its usual corporate energy as Alexandra stood frozen in the glass-walled conference room, her phone pressed against her ear. The quarterly board meeting had run 3 hours over schedule, and the sun was already painting the Seattle skyline in shades of amber and gold. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see the bustling streets below, where normal people were heading home to normal lives, something that felt as foreign to her as another planet. "Alexandra, we need your decision on the Henderson acquisition," came the voice of Richard Thornfield, her chief financial officer, cutting through her momentary distraction. "The Tokyo markets open in 6 hours." She turned back to the room filled with 12 of the most powerful executives in the Pacific Northwest, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and tablets. Charts and graphs projected onto the smart boards showed profit margins that would make shareholders dance with joy. Everything was going according to plan. Her plan, meticulously crafted over 15 years of climbing from junior analyst to CEO of Meridian Enterprises, one of the largest consulting firms on the West Coast. "Push it through," she said without hesitation, her voice carrying the authority that had earned her a spot on Forbes' 40 Under 40 Inches list 3 years running. "Schedule the announcement for Monday morning." As the meeting finally adjourned and executives filed out, discussing dinner plans and weekend getaways, Alexandra felt the familiar weight of solitude settle on her shoulders. Her assistant Janet appeared in the doorway with the efficiency of a Swiss timepiece. "Ms. Winters, your daughter is waiting in the lobby. She's been there since 4:30. Alexandra glanced at her Cartier watch, 7:45 p.m. A stab of something she couldn't quite name pierced through her professional composure. "Of course. Tell her I'll be down in 10 minutes. I just need to finish these contracts." But as Janet disappeared down the hallway, Alexandra found herself drawn to the window again. Somewhere 42 floors below, 8-year-old Emma was waiting, again. The image of her daughter, small and patient in one of those oversized lobby chairs, should have sent her racing to the elevator. Instead, she found herself reaching for the Henderson files, telling herself that 5 more minutes wouldn't matter. It was then that she heard it, a sound so unexpected in the sterile corporate environment that it made her freeze mid-reach. A child's cry, muffled but unmistakably distressed, echoing through the building's ventilation system. Her blood turned to ice as recognition hit her like a physical blow. That wasn't just any child. That was Emma. Alexandra's briefcase clattered to the floor as she rushed out of the conference room, her heels clicking frantically against the polished marble floors. The sound seemed to be coming from the emergency stairwell, and as she pushed through the heavy metal door, the crying became clearer, more desperate. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering against her ribs in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the physical exertion. On the 38th floor landing, she stopped. Through the gap under the stairwell door, she could see them. Emma, curled up in a corner with her knees drawn to her chest, her small body shaking with the kind of panic that no 8-year-old should ever experience. And kneeling beside her, speaking in soft, soothing tones, was a man in a janitor's uniform. "Hey there, sweetheart," he was saying, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to wrap around Emma like a protective blanket. "Can you tell me your name?" Emma," her daughter managed between gasping breaths. "That's a beautiful name, Emma. I'm Daniel. I have a little girl too, and sometimes she gets scared just like you. Would it help if I sang you a song? It always helps my Katie feel better." Alexandra pressed herself against the wall, her legs suddenly weak. She watched through the small window as this stranger, this janitor whose name she'd never bothered to learn despite seeing him countless times, began to sing. His voice was untrained but filled with genuine care, a gentle lullaby that seemed to transform the sterile stairwell into something sacred. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The simple melody that Alexandra had sung to Emma as a toddler, back when bedtime stories and gentle songs were part of their nightly ritual. Back before board meetings and client calls took priority over everything else. As Daniel continued singing, she watched her daughter's breathing slowly return to normal, the rigid tension in her small shoulders beginning to ease. Up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky. When had she stopped singing to Emma? When had their relationship become nothing more than scheduled check-ins between meetings, hurried conversations in the backseat of her Tesla while she answered emails? Alexandra realized with devastating clarity that she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen Emma truly relaxed, truly happy. The panic attacks that had started 2 months ago suddenly made perfect sense. As Daniel helped Emma to her feet, steadying her with the kind of patient gentleness that Alexandra had forgotten existed, she found herself studying this man who had just given her daughter something she, with all her success, all her resources, all her power, had failed to provide. Peace. Safety. The simple assurance that someone cared enough to stop everything and just be present. The realization hit her like a tsunami, washing away 15 years of carefully constructed justifications. She had built an empire, commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, and accumulated wealth that could buy almost anything. But she had failed at the one job that truly mattered. She had become a stranger to her own child, so absent from Emma's daily reality that her daughter had learned to seek comfort from the janitor, rather than wait for a mother who was always too busy to truly see her. Standing in that stairwell, listening to a stranger's lullaby calm her daughter's fears, Alexandra Winters began to understand the true cost of her success. As Daniel's gentle voice filled the stairwell with the final notes of the lullaby, Alexandra pressed her palm against the cold concrete wall, steadying herself against a truth so stark it threatened to buckle her knees. Here, in this forgotten corner of her own building, she was witnessing something that all her board meetings, profit margins, and strategic acquisitions had never been able to create: genuine human connection. The contrast was devastating in its simplicity. Daniel wore a uniform that probably cost less than Alexandra's lunch meetings, yet he possessed something infinitely more valuable than her corner office, with its panoramic view of Elliott Bay. He had time. He had presence. He had the ability to see a frightened child and respond with exactly what she needed. Not what a business plan dictated, not what efficiency demanded, but what her heart required. "Better now?" Daniel asked Emma, his voice carrying the kind of patient warmth that Alexandra remembered from her own childhood but had somehow forgotten how to access. He helped Emma to her feet with the careful attention of someone who understood that small people had big feelings, that panic attacks in 8-year-olds weren't problems to be solved, but experiences to be witnessed and soothed. Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "My mom is always working," she said, the words hitting Alexandra like physical blows. "She says important people need her to make important decisions. But sometimes I get scared and I don't know where she is." Daniel crouched down to Emma's eye level, his movements deliberate and respectful. "You know what? Sometimes grown-ups get so busy trying to build big things that they forget the most important thing is right in front of them. But that doesn't mean your mom doesn't love you. Sometimes they just need reminding about what really matters." Alexandra found herself comparing this moment to her typical interactions with Emma. Their conversations happened in cars, between appointments, during hurried breakfasts while she reviewed contracts, in elevators between floors of meetings. When had she last sat still long enough to truly listen to her daughter? When had she last given Emma her complete, undivided attention without glancing at her phone or mentally rehearsing her next presentation? The answer was as clear as it was heartbreaking. She couldn't remember. Daniel was showing Emma something that Alexandra had convinced herself was inefficient, unprofitable, and ultimately unnecessary in their fast-paced world. He was showing her that stopping everything for one person's pain wasn't a waste of time. It was the entire point. That success measured in quarterly reports meant nothing if you failed at the daily report of being present for the people who needed you most. "Do you know the song?" Daniel asked Emma, beginning to hum the melody again. "My Katie loves to sing it with me. Sometimes when she's scared we sing it together and it makes everything feel safer." Emma's face brightened for the first time in what Alexandra realized had been weeks. "My mom used to sing it to me when I was little," she said, her voice carrying a wistfulness that made Alexandra's chest constrict. "But now she's always too busy." The words "used to" echoed in Alexandra's mind like an indictment. When had her daughter's childhood become past tense? When had always too busy become Emma's primary description of her mother? She watched as Daniel began the lullaby again, this time encouraging Emma to join in, their voices blending in the kind of spontaneous harmony that no amount of money could orchestrate. This janitor, whose name she'd never bothered to learn despite passing him countless times in these very hallways, was giving Emma something that all of Alexandra's success, all her achievements, all her carefully constructed empire couldn't provide. He was giving her the gift of being seen, of being worth someone's complete attention, of being important enough to stop for. Alexandra thought about her own day, the Henderson acquisition that would add millions to their portfolio, the strategic planning session that would position Meridian Enterprises for unprecedented growth, the conference call with Tokyo investors that could reshape their entire Pacific Rim strategy. All of it had seemed so crucial just minutes ago. All of it had justified another late evening, another missed dinner, another night when Emma would fall asleep before her mother made it home. But watching Daniel's patient care, seeing Emma's face relax into something approaching peace, Alexandra began to understand the devastating mathematics of her choices. She had traded the irreplaceable moments of her daughter's childhood for the replaceable achievements of corporate success. She had chosen to be indispensable to hundreds of clients, while becoming dispensable to the one person who should have mattered most. The realization wasn't just about time, it was about presence. Even when she was physically with Emma, Alexandra's mind was elsewhere, calculating, strategizing, optimizing. She had mastered the art of being productively absent even when she was technically present. Daniel, on the other hand, was demonstrating something she had forgotten existed, the radical act of complete attention. As the impromptu concert in the stairwell continued, Alexandra saw herself through Emma's eyes for the first time. Not as the powerful CEO whose decisions affected thousands of employees, not as the strategic mind who had built a consulting empire from nothing, but as the mother who was always too busy, too important, too essential to everyone except her own child. The contrast between what she had thought success looked like and what it actually looked like was so stark it left her breathless. Real success, she realized, wasn't measured in profit margins or board appointments. It was measured in whether the people you loved felt loved by you. And by that metric, she was failing catastrophically. Alexandra remained frozen in the stairwell, watching as Daniel helped Emma collect her backpack and water bottle. The tender care in his movements made her recognize something that had been invisible to her until this moment. She had systematically constructed barriers between herself and Emma, all in the name of protection and success. It started innocently enough, she realized. The private security detail she'd insisted on after a competitor had made veiled threats during a hostile takeover 3 years ago. Emma couldn't walk to school anymore. Too risky. She couldn't play in public parks. Too exposed. She couldn't have spontaneous playdates. Too uncontrolled. Each security measure had been logical, necessary even. But layer by layer, Alexandra had built a fortress around Emma that had gradually become a prison. The barriers weren't just physical. There were time barriers, too. Meetings that couldn't be moved, calls that couldn't be rescheduled, decisions that couldn't wait. Alexandra had trained everyone around her, including Emma, to understand that Meridian Enterprises came first. Not because she loved the company more than her daughter, but because she had convinced herself that building the company was the same as building Emma's future. She watched Daniel kneel down to tie Emma's loose shoelace, his movements unhurried, despite the fact that he probably had floors of offices to clean before his shift ended. Here was a man who clearly understood something Alexandra had forgotten, that the most important work happened in the smallest moments, not the biggest boardrooms. "I have to go back to work now," Emma was saying to Daniel, and Alexandra felt her heart crack at how her 8-year-old daughter spoke about waiting in lobbies as work. "But thank you for the song. My mom taught it to me when I was 5, but we don't sing anymore." The barriers revealed themselves in that simple statement. Somewhere along the way, Alexandra had stopped being the mother who sang lullabies and started being the CEO who scheduled quality time. She had replaced spontaneous affection with structured activities, natural conversation with progress reports on Emma's academic achievements. Even their few meals together had become performance reviews disguised as family dinners. "How was school? Did you finish your Mandarin homework? Are you ready for your piano recital?" Daniel stood up, gently ruffling Emma's hair. Well, maybe you can teach your mom the harmony I showed you. Sometimes grown-ups forget the songs they used to know, and kids are the best teachers for helping them remember. As they walked toward the stairwell door, Alexandra realized the most devastating barrier of all. She had taught Emma not to need her. Every missed bedtime story had been replaced with an audiobook. Every skipped dinner had been compensated with a more expensive restaurant on weekends. Every absence had been filled with tutors, nannies, and activities designed to enrich Emma's life in ways that Alexandra's presence apparently could not. She had systematically outsourced motherhood while convincing herself she was providing better opportunities. Private violin lessons instead of singing together in the car. Academic chess club instead of playing silly board games on rainy afternoons. Cultural enrichment programs instead of lazy Saturday mornings building blanket forts and sharing secrets. The barriers had been constructed with the best intentions, but they had created something monstrous, a relationship where her daughter had learned to manage without her. Emma had adapted to Alexandra's absence so completely that she no longer seemed to expect her mother's presence, no longer seemed disappointed by the canceled plans and postponed promises. The resignation in Emma's voice when she spoke about her mother being too busy wasn't anger, it was acceptance. And that acceptance was more heartbreaking than any tantrum could have been. Alexandra thought about the monthly mother-daughter activities she had carefully scheduled and proudly executed. The Broadway shows, the expensive shopping trips, the weekend getaways to luxury resorts. She had convinced herself these grand gestures compensated for the daily absences, but now she understood they were just more barriers, ways of avoiding the intimate, ordinary moments that actually built relationships. The museum visits were scheduled, not spontaneous. The shopping trips were documented for social media, not enjoyed for their own sake. The weekend getaways were planned around her speaking engagements and board commitments, not around Emma's interests or needs. Even their special times together had been infected by Alexandra's need to optimize, to multitask, to make every moment serve multiple purposes. She had built barriers out of her own fear too, she realized. Fear that slowing down would mean losing her competitive edge. Fear that being fully present would make her vulnerable to the kind of devastating loss she had experienced when Emma's father died in a car accident 4 years ago. Fear that loving completely would mean risking complete heartbreak again. So she had protected herself by staying busy, by focusing on controllable things like quarterly reports and market analyses, instead of the uncontrollable wonder of raising a child. She had convinced herself that building a financial empire for Emma was the same as building an emotional connection with her. That providing for Emma's future was more important than being present for Emma's childhood. The barriers had been invisible to her because they were built from good intentions and reasonable justifications. But watching Daniel's effortless connection with her daughter, Alexandra could see them clearly for the first time. Towering walls of protection that had become prisons of isolation, keeping the world out, but also keeping love from flowing freely between mother and daughter. She had built a fortress around Emma's life and somehow locked herself outside of it. As Daniel and Emma disappeared through the stairwell door, Alexandra remained paralyzed by what she had witnessed. The easy trust Emma had placed in a stranger's hands was being given to someone else. Trust that should have been hers by birthright but had somehow been forfeited through 1,000 small absences and 1,000,000 tiny failures to be present. She found herself following them at a distance, staying far enough back to remain unnoticed, but close enough to continue observing this masterclass in human connection that was unfolding before her eyes. Through the glass doors leading back into the main office area, she watched Daniel walk Emma toward the elevators, their conversation animated in a way that made Alexandra's chest ache with recognition and loss. Emma was telling Daniel about her day, her small hands gesturing excitedly as she described something that had happened in her art class. Alexandra realized with stunning clarity that she couldn't remember the last time Emma had shared her day with such enthusiasm. Their daily debriefs had become perfunctory exchanges. How was school? Fine. Did you learn anything interesting? I guess. Any homework? Already finished. But with Daniel, Emma was alive in a way Alexandra hadn't seen in months. She was sharing not just facts but feelings, not just events but excitement. This janitor, who probably made in a year what Alexandra earned in a month, was receiving the gift of Emma's genuine enthusiasm, the same gift Alexandra had been trying to buy with expensive experiences and carefully planned activities. "You know what my Katie loves to do when she's feeling worried," Daniel was saying as they reached the elevator bank. She draws pictures of all the things that make her happy. Then when the scary feelings come back, she looks at her happy pictures and remembers that there's always something good, even when things feel hard. Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom with the seriousness that children bring to important matters. That's smart. I never thought of that. I usually just try to be perfect, so my mom doesn't have to worry about me too. The words hit Alexandra like a physical blow. Emma was trying to be perfect to make her mother's life easier, carrying the burden of managing her own emotional needs, so Alexandra could focus on her career without guilt. Her 8-year-old daughter had learned to be self-sufficient not out of strength, but out of necessity. She had learned not to need her mother because she had learned her mother didn't have time to be needed. "You know what?" Daniel said, pressing the elevator button. "Moms don't need kids to be perfect. They need kids to be honest about when they're scared or sad or happy. That's how families stay close, by sharing the real feelings, not just the perfect ones." Alexandra watched Emma consider this revolutionary concept, that her authenticity might be more valuable than her achievements, that her vulnerability might be more welcome than her independence. It was a lesson Alexandra herself had forgotten, somewhere between climbing corporate ladders and building business empires. The elevator arrived, and Alexandra held her breath as Daniel and Emma stepped inside. Through the closing doors, she heard Emma say, "I wish my mom had time to draw pictures with me. She used to, when I was little, but now she says drawing doesn't build skills for the future." The doors closed on that devastating revelation, leaving Alexandra alone in the hallway, confronting the horrible truth of what she had lost. Emma's trust, enthusiasm, and genuine affection were being freely given to a stranger because they were no longer being received by her mother. She had taught Emma that emotional needs were inconvenient, that childhood wonder was inefficient, that authentic connection was less valuable than productive achievement. Daniel was receiving everything Alexandra had unknowingly rejected: Emma's spontaneous joy, her unguarded thoughts, her natural desire to share experiences with someone who cared. He was getting the real Emma, while Alexandra got the carefully managed version, the daughter who had learned to present only the achievements and hide the struggles, to share only the successes and suppress the fears. She thought about Emma's art projects, the ones that used to cover their refrigerator like badges of pride. When had she stopped putting them up? When had she started suggesting that Emma focus more on her academic assignments and less on creative play? When had she begun measuring Emma's worth by test scores and progress reports instead of the spark in her eyes when she discovered something new? The emotional transfer was complete. Emma was giving to Daniel what she had once offered to Alexandra: trust, excitement, the desire to be truly known and accepted. And Daniel was receiving it with the grace and presence that Alexandra had forgotten how to provide, too busy optimizing Emma's future to nurture Emma's present. Standing in that empty hallway, Alexandra realized she was witnessing the natural consequence of her choices. Love, like water, flows toward whoever receives it with openness and availability. Emma's affection wasn't being stolen by a stranger. It was flowing toward the person who had space to receive it, time to honor it, and wisdom to treasure it. The most painful part wasn't that Emma was connecting with someone else. It was that Alexandra could see, with devastating clarity, how easy it would have been to receive this gift herself. All Daniel had done was stop, listen, and respond with genuine care. He hadn't needed special training or expensive resources. He had simply needed to be present, to see Emma's pain and respond with compassion instead of solutions, to offer comfort instead of improvement. Alexandra had been so focused on giving Emma everything she thought her daughter needed for success that she had failed to give her the one thing she actually needed: a mother who was fully, completely, unreservedly present in the ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Alexandra found herself in the executive bathroom on the 42nd floor, staring at her reflection in the mirror, a woman who looked successful by every external measure but felt hollow in ways she was only beginning to understand. She needed to trace back through time, to understand how she had arrived at this moment of devastating recognition. When exactly had she lost Emma? The journey backward began with today, Emma having a panic attack in a stairwell, seeking comfort from a janitor because her mother was too busy for the most fundamental parental duty, being available when your child is in crisis. But the roots went deeper, she realized, much deeper than she had wanted to acknowledge. 3 months ago, Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had called to report that Emma seemed withdrawn during creative writing time. Instead of addressing the emotional implications, Alexandra had hired a private writing tutor to boost Emma's scores. She remembered thinking she was being proactive, solving the problem efficiently. Now she understood she had been treating symptoms while ignoring the disease. Emma's growing sense that her authentic self wasn't worth her mother's attention. 6 months ago, Emma had asked if they could have pancakes for dinner and watch movies in their pajamas, just because it sounded fun. Alexandra had countered with reservations at Le Bernardin, explaining that Emma needed to develop sophisticated tastes and cultural awareness. She had turned a moment of childlike spontaneity into another educational opportunity, another chance to build Emma's resume for a future that was becoming more important than Emma's present. 1 year ago, Emma had started asking fewer questions about Alexandra's work, stopped sharing stories from school, and begun managing her own homework and bedtime routine with minimal supervision. Alexandra had celebrated this as Emma becoming more mature and independent. Now she realized it was Emma learning that her mother's time and attention were scarce resources that shouldn't be wasted on childish needs. 18 months ago, the panic attacks had actually started then, Alexandra now realized, but they had been small things: tears before violin recitals, stomachaches before social events, difficulty sleeping when Alexandra traveled for business. Instead of recognizing these as signs of distress, Alexandra had addressed them with logistics: child psychologists, meditation apps, schedule adjustments designed to make Emma more efficient at managing her emotions independently. 2 years ago, Alexandra had missed Emma's school play because of an emergency board meeting. Emma had forgiven her instantly, even proudly telling her classmates that her mom was too important to come to kid stuff. That should have been a wake-up call, but Alexandra had felt proud that Emma understood the demands of her career. She had misinterpreted Emma's accommodation as maturity, instead of recognizing it as a 6-year-old learning that her mother's work would always come first. 3 years ago, the last time they had built a blanket fort together, Emma had been 5, and they had spent an entire Saturday afternoon creating an elaborate castle in the living room, complete with snacks and flashlights and whispered secrets. Alexandra remembered thinking it was a lovely way to spend time, but she had never initiated such an activity again. There were always more important things to do, more productive ways to spend their limited time together. 4 years ago, Emma's father had died, and Alexandra had thrown herself into work with renewed intensity, telling herself she needed to secure Emma's future as a single parent. What she now realized was that she had been running from grief, using professional achievement as a way to avoid processing the devastating loss of her partner and Emma's father. Emma had needed her mother's presence during the most traumatic experience of her young life, but instead she had gotten a mother who was more absent than ever, hidden behind walls of productive grieving. 5 years ago, the promotion to CEO, the one that had required travel 3 weeks out of every month for the first year. Emma had been 3 then, still young enough to cry when Alexandra left for business trips. But by the time Emma turned 4, she had stopped crying. Alexandra had thought this was Emma adjusting well to the demands of her career. Now she understood it was Emma learning not to expect consistent presence from the most important person in her life. The timeline revealed a pattern that was more devastating than any single moment of failure. Alexandra had been systematically training Emma not to need her. Every time Emma had reached out for connection, Alexandra had responded with improvement instead of intimacy. Every time Emma had sought comfort, Alexandra had provided solutions instead of presence. Every time Emma had asked for simple togetherness, Alexandra had substituted elaborate experiences designed to compensate for her absence. But the most painful realization was that Emma had adapted beautifully to everything Alexandra had asked of her. She had learned to be independent when Alexandra needed to travel. She had learned to be efficient when Alexandra's time was limited. She had learned to be perfect when Alexandra's stress couldn't handle additional complications. Emma had become everything Alexandra needed her to be in order to make Alexandra's career possible. The problem was that in becoming the daughter Alexandra needed, Emma had stopped being the child she actually was. And Alexandra had been so focused on building Emma's future that she had missed Emma's childhood entirely. She had been so busy preparing Emma for a hypothetical tomorrow that she had forgotten to be present for the very real today. Standing in that bathroom, Alexandra realized that the question wasn't when she had lost Emma. The question was whether there was still time to find her again. Alexandra made her way down to the lobby, her heels echoing in the empty elevator shaft as she descended toward a confrontation with the full scope of what her choices had cost. The Meridian Tower lobby, usually bustling with the energy of ambitious professionals, felt cavernous and cold at this hour. Only a few security guards remained, along with Emma, who sat in her usual spot, a leather chair that dwarfed her small frame, her legs dangling several inches from the floor. Emma looked up when the elevator doors opened, and Alexandra felt her heart shatter at the expression on her daughter's face. It wasn't excitement or relief or even mild pleasure at seeing her mother. It was resignation mixed with a kind of weary politeness, the look of a child who had learned to manage her expectations so thoroughly that disappointment had become impossible. "Hi, Mom," Emma said, gathering her backpack with the efficiency of someone far older than 8. "Did you finish your important meeting?" The word, important, hung in the air between them like an accusation. Everything was always important, except this. Except the daily reality of Emma's existence. Except the ordinary moments that made up a childhood. Except the simple fact that her daughter had been waiting for 3.5 hours in a corporate lobby because her mother couldn't prioritize her own child over a business acquisition. Alexandra sat down in the chair next to Emma, something she realized she had never done before. Usually, their reunions were brief, efficient affairs, a quick kiss on the forehead, a rapid walk to the car, a debriefing session that felt more like a business meeting than a mother-daughter conversation. But tonight she sat down and really looked at Emma for the first time in what felt like years. What she saw broke her heart. Emma had lost weight. Not dramatically, but enough that her school uniform hung loosely on her small frame. There were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many nights spent worrying instead of sleeping. Her fingernails were bitten down to the quick, a nervous habit that Alexandra had noticed but attributed to typical childhood anxiety, rather than recognizing it as a symptom of deeper distress. But most devastating of all was Emma's posture, shoulders slightly hunched, as if she was trying to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less of an inconvenience. This was a child who had learned to minimize her presence in the world, to require as little as possible from the adults around her, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention she could receive. "Emma," Alexandra said, her voice catching on her daughter's name, "how long have you been having those scared feelings in the stairwell?" Emma's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the question. "You heard that?" "I did, and I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me." Emma shrugged, a gesture that tried to appear casual but carried the weight of a child who had learned that her needs were burdens to be managed, rather than calls for connection to be answered. "It's okay. Daniel helped me. He's nice. He has a daughter too." "Tell me about the scared feelings," Alexandra pressed, fighting every instinct that wanted to turn this into a problem-solving session instead of a moment of genuine inquiry. Emma was quiet for a long moment, clearly deciding whether her mother could handle the truth. Finally, she said, "They started after you missed my art show in February. You were supposed to come, but then you had that conference call with the people in London, and you said next time would be better because the timing would work out better." Alexandra remembered that day with crystal clarity now. The conference call had been about a contract that had ultimately fallen through anyway, months of work on a deal that never materialized. She had chosen a failed business opportunity over her daughter's artistic debut, and the consequence was sitting right next to her in the form of a child who had learned that her achievements weren't worth celebrating unless they fit into her mother's schedule. "The scared feelings happen when I don't know where you are," Emma continued, her voice small but steady. "Like when you say you'll be down in 10 minutes, but then it's an hour, and I don't know if something bad happened or if you just forgot about me. And they happen when I try to tell you about my day, but you're typing on your phone, so I can't tell if you're listening or if you're thinking about work." Each word was a precision strike against Alexandra's heart. Emma wasn't just describing anxiety. She was describing the natural response of a child whose primary attachment figure had become unreliable, unpredictable, and emotionally unavailable. The panic attacks weren't a disorder to be treated. They were a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. "They happen at school, too," Emma added, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When other kids talk about what they did with their moms on the weekend, and I can't think of anything we did that was just for fun. Or when they complain about their moms being annoying or embarrassing, and I think about how I never see you enough to be annoyed by you." The consequence of Alexandra's choices crystallized in that moment with devastating clarity. She had created a child who longed to be annoyed by her mother's presence because that would mean her mother was present enough to be annoying. She had raised a daughter who felt grateful for any attention, even negative attention, because attention itself had become such a scarce resource. Emma pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack, smoothing it out on her lap. It was a drawing, a crude but recognizable sketch of two figures holding hands under a rainbow. "I drew this after Daniel told me about drawing happy pictures," she said. "It's you and me, but I couldn't remember what we look like when we're together and happy, so I had to imagine it." Alexandra stared at the drawing through tears she couldn't control. Her daughter had to imagine what happiness with her mother might look like because she had no recent memories to draw from. The consequence of building a business empire wasn't just missed bedtimes and postponed promises. It was a child who had to create fictional memories of maternal love because the real ones had been systematically sacrificed to corporate success. "Emma," Alexandra whispered, "I am so sorry." Emma looked up at her with eyes that held too much understanding for an 8-year-old. "It's okay, Mom. I know your work is important." Daniel explained that sometimes grown-ups have to do hard things to take care of their families. But it wasn't okay, and Alexandra finally understood that Emma's forgiveness was perhaps the most heartbreaking consequence of all. Her daughter had learned to rationalize her mother's absence, to make excuses for the inexcusable, to protect the adult who should have been protecting her. Emma had become the caretaker in their relationship, managing her mother's guilt and her own needs with the emotional sophistication of someone far beyond her years. The true consequence of Alexandra's choices wasn't just that she had missed Emma's childhood. It was that she had forced Emma to grow up too fast, to become too understanding, too forgiving, too willing to sacrifice her own needs for her mother's career. She had created a child who was afraid to need too much because she had learned that needing her mother was an inconvenience to be minimized rather than a relationship to be cherished. As they finally made their way to the parking garage, Emma's small hand in hers feeling both familiar and foreign, Alexandra confronted the most bitter irony of her entire adult life. Every metric by which the world measured success painted her as a winner, except for the one that actually mattered. She had achieved everything she had set out to accomplish, and in doing so had failed at everything that truly counted. The elevator ride to the parking level was silent except for the mechanical hum of descent, but Alexandra's mind was racing through the mathematics of her paradox. Forbes had named her one of the most influential businesswomen under 40. Meridian Enterprises had grown by 300% under her leadership. She commanded speaking fees that exceeded most people's annual salaries. Board positions, consulting offers, and acquisition proposals arrived weekly. Yet here she was, holding the hand of a daughter who had to imagine what happiness with her mother looked like because she had no real memories to reference. Her Tesla Model S sat gleaming under the fluorescent garage lights, a testament to her financial success. Emma climbed into the back seat with practiced efficiency, buckling herself in without assistance, another small sign of premature independence born from necessity rather than natural development. As Alexandra started the engine, she realized that even this luxury vehicle had become a mobile office, equipped with hands-free calling systems and internet connectivity that allowed her to work during every moment of transit. How many phone calls had she taken during their drives home? How many deals had she negotiated while Emma sat silently in the back seat, learning that her mother's voice was available to clients and colleagues, but rarely to her? How many times had Emma tried to share something important only to be met with Alexandra's index finger, the universal signal for, "Wait, this call is more important than whatever you need to say"? "Mom?" Emma's voice came from the back seat as they pulled out of the garage. "Can we listen to music instead of your work calls tonight?" The request was so simple, so reasonable, that it highlighted the absurdity of their normal routine. Alexandra realized she couldn't remember the last time they had shared music during a car ride, the last time their vehicle had been a space for connection, rather than another extension of her office. "Of course, sweetheart. What would you like to hear? The song Daniel taught me? Twinkle, twinkle, little star?" As the familiar melody filled the car, Alexandra found herself examining the twisted logic that had governed her life for the past several years. She had convinced herself that working longer hours was an investment in Emma's future, that building a fortune was more important than building memories, that providing financial security was the highest form of love she could offer as a single mother. But Emma wasn't benefiting from a trust fund. She was suffering from a trust deficit. She didn't need more money for her future. She needed more mother in her present. The financial security Alexandra had worked so desperately to create was meaningless if Emma's emotional security was being systematically destroyed in the process. The success paradox revealed itself in stark terms. Alexandra had become incredibly successful at doing work that prevented her from doing the work that mattered most. She had optimized her career so thoroughly that she had destroyed her capacity for the relationships that gave career success any meaning. She had climbed to the top of a mountain only to discover she had been scaling the wrong peak entirely. Emma began singing along to the lullaby, her 8-year-old voice pure and sweet in the enclosed space of the car. Alexandra found herself remembering other car rides from years past, when Emma was younger and they would sing together during their drives. When had she decided that singing was inefficient? When had she concluded that their commute time could be better spent on conference calls and strategic planning sessions? The paradox extended beyond time management to the very definition of success itself. Alexandra had spent years measuring her worth by external validation, stock prices, profit margins, industry recognition, peer approval. But none of those measures accounted for the most important metric of all: whether the people you love feel loved by you. By that standard, she was failing catastrophically. She thought about the other successful parents she knew, the ones who managed to balance high-powered careers with present, engaged parenting. They existed. She had seen them at school events, heard them talk about family traditions and shared adventures. What had they understood that she had missed? How had they avoided the trap of believing that career success required family sacrifice? The answer, she was beginning to realize, wasn't about time management or efficiency optimization. It was about priority clarity. The other successful parents she admired had never forgotten that their professional achievements were meant to serve their family relationships, not replace them. They had maintained the perspective that work was what they did, but family was who they were. Alexandra had inverted that relationship. Somewhere along the way, her identity had become so fused with her professional role that she had forgotten how to exist as simply Emma's mother. She introduced herself as the CEO of Meridian Enterprises, not as Emma's mom. She networked at school events instead of connecting with other parents. She measured Emma's development against achievement benchmarks instead of celebrating her daughter's unique personality and interests. "Mom, we're home," Emma said as they pulled into their driveway, a sprawling estate in Bellevue that showcased Alexandra's financial success but had never quite felt like a home where a family lived and loved together. As they walked toward the front door, Alexandra realized that her success paradox had a name. She had won the game she had decided to play, but she had chosen the wrong game entirely. And unlike business failures, which could be recovered from with better strategy and renewed effort, the failure to be present for your child's childhood was irreversible. Those moments, once lost, could never be reclaimed or rescheduled or optimized for better outcomes. The most successful thing she could do now was to admit she had been failing at the thing that mattered most, and begin the difficult work of redefining success in terms that included the people she loved feeling loved by her. Inside their house, a showcase of architectural achievement that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens but felt more like a museum than a family home, Alexandra finally saw Emma's daily existence through clear eyes. The systematic destruction of childhood wonder wasn't happening through neglect, but through its opposite: a suffocating abundance of structured activities designed to optimize Emma's potential rather than nurture her spirit. Emma's bedroom was a testament to Alexandra's approach to parenting. Educational posters lined the walls, a desk organized with color-coded supplies for different subjects, shelves filled with award-winning books arranged by reading level rather than personal interest. Even the toys were carefully curated for their developmental value. There wasn't a single thing in the room that existed purely for joy, purely for the messy, unproductive pleasure of being 8 years old. "What time is your Mandarin lesson tomorrow?" Alexandra asked, though she already knew the answer. She had scheduled it herself, along with everything else that filled Emma's days from 6:30 a.m. until bedtime. 6:30, Emma replied, already laying out her school uniform for the next morning with mechanical precision. Then violin at 4, and Dr. Martinez at 5:30. Dr. Martinez. The child psychologist Alexandra had hired to help Emma manage her anxiety, never recognizing that the anxiety was a natural response to a completely unnatural childhood. Emma was seeing a therapist to learn coping mechanisms for a life that no child should have to cope with in the first place. Alexandra found herself mentally reviewing Emma's weekly schedule, seeing it for the first time from Emma's perspective rather than from her own productivity-obsessed viewpoint. Monday, Mandarin, school, violin, French tutoring. Tuesday, Mandarin, school, tennis, academic chess club. Wednesday, Mandarin, school, violin, therapy. Thursday, Mandarin, school, coding class, advanced mathematics tutoring. Friday, Mandarin, school, violin, cultural enrichment activities. Weekends weren't any better. Saturday, violin practice, museum visits, educational workshops, social skills development groups. Sunday, academic preparation for the coming week, organized playdates with other high-achieving children, family activities that were carefully planned and executed like business initiatives. When did Emma get to be bored? When did she get to stare at clouds and make up stories about their shapes? When did she get to dig in dirt, or build with blocks, or have imaginary conversations with stuffed animals? When did she get to discover what she actually enjoyed, as opposed to what she was supposed to enjoy according to the carefully researched activities designed to build her cognitive and social capabilities? Emma, Alexandra said, sitting down on her daughter's bed, something she realized she hadn't done in months. What's your favorite part of the day? Emma paused in her evening routine, clearly unprepared for such an open-ended question. After a long moment, she said, I like the car rides between activities sometimes. When you're not on the phone, it's quiet, and I can look out the window and think about things. The answer was like a knife to Alexandra's heart. Emma's favorite part of her carefully orchestrated day was the empty spaces between activities, the brief moments when she wasn't being improved or developed or optimized. Her daughter was finding refuge in transition time, in the few minutes when no one was asking her to perform or achieve or demonstrate progress. What do you think about during those car rides? Alexandra asked. Sometimes I make up songs, or I imagine what it would be like to have a normal day where I could choose what to do. Like maybe wake up when I felt like waking up, and then decide if I wanted to draw or read, or maybe just lie on the floor and look at the ceiling. Mrs. Patterson at school says some kids get to do that on weekends, just choose their own activities based on what sounds fun. Alexandra felt physically ill. Emma was fantasizing about the basic freedom that should be every child's birthright. The right to unstructured time, to self-directed play, to the simple pleasure of choosing her own activities based on curiosity rather than curriculum. She looked around Emma's room again, seeing it now as Emma must see it, a beautiful prison designed to optimize her development while suffocating her natural instincts for exploration and discovery. Every surface was organized, every activity was purposeful, every moment was accounted for. There was no space for mess, for mistakes, for the kind of unproductive wandering that actually fed a child's soul. What would you do if you had a whole day with nothing scheduled? Alexandra asked. Emma's eyes lit up for the first time that evening. Really? Like a whole day? A whole day. I would sleep until I wasn't tired anymore. Then I would eat breakfast in my pajamas while watching cartoons. The silly ones, not the educational ones. Then maybe I would draw pictures of made-up animals, or build something with blocks, or read a book just because it looked interesting, not because it was on my reading list. And maybe we could sing songs in the kitchen while we make cookies, even if they don't turn out perfect. Each item on Emma's fantasy agenda was a rejection of everything Alexandra had structured into her life. Emma wanted less, not more. She wanted freedom, not optimization. She wanted the simple pleasure of being a child, not the constant pressure of becoming someone else's idea of what a successful child should be. Alexandra realized that she had scheduled Emma's childhood so thoroughly that there was no room left for Emma's own personality to emerge. Every hour was dedicated to developing skills and abilities that would serve Emma's future, but none of it was nourishing Emma's present. She had turned her daughter's life into a full-time job of becoming someone else, without ever discovering who Emma actually was when left to her own devices. The overscheduled life wasn't just about time management, it was about identity suppression. Emma was learning to define herself by her achievements and activities, rather than by her interests and inclinations. She was becoming a collection of skills and accomplishments, rather than a unique individual with her own thoughts, preferences, and dreams. Looking at her daughter, who was still glowing with the possibility of an unscheduled day, Alexandra understood that the most radical thing she could do as a parent wasn't to add more activities to Emma's schedule. It was to subtract them, to create space for Emma to discover who she was when she wasn't being directed, improved, or optimized. The overscheduled life had been Alexandra's attempt to give Emma every advantage, but it had actually robbed Emma of the greatest advantage of all, the chance to know herself. As Alexandra tucked Emma into bed that night, another routine that had been delegated to nannies for months, she found herself confronting the most heartbreaking aspect of Emma's existence: the waiting. Not just the physical waiting in lobbies and car lines, but the deeper, more profound waiting that had shaped Emma's entire relationship with hope itself. Emma lay in her carefully designed bed, surrounded by everything money could buy to create the perfect sleep environment: blackout curtains recommended by sleep specialists, a white noise machine calibrated for optimal rest, organic cotton sheets with the ideal thread count for temperature regulation. Yet none of these expensive solutions could address the real barrier to Emma's peaceful sleep, the constant state of emotional suspension that had become her normal way of being in the world. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small in the darkened room. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" The request was so simple, so fundamentally reasonable, that Alexandra felt ashamed she hadn't offered without being asked. How many nights had Emma fallen asleep alone, not because she didn't need comfort, but because she had learned not to expect it? "Of course, sweetheart," Alexandra said, settling into the reading chair beside Emma's bed, a piece of furniture she had purchased but rarely used for its intended purpose. Use. As Emma's breathing began to slow toward sleep, Alexandra found herself thinking about all the ways waiting had become woven into the fabric of her daughter's daily experience. Emma waited for her mother to finish phone calls before speaking. She waited for scheduled quality time slots to share important news. She waited for weekends to have meaningful conversations. She waited for vacations to feel like she had her mother's full attention. But the waiting went deeper than schedule logistics. Emma was waiting for permission to be herself, the version of herself that wasn't perfectly organized, academically accelerated, and socially optimized. She was waiting for someone to notice that beneath all the achievements and activities was a little girl who sometimes just wanted to be silly, or scared, or completely ordinary. Alexandra watched Emma's face relax as sleep approached, and she could see in her daughter's features the accumulated weight of 8 years of emotional longing. Emma had learned to wait not just for her mother's time, but for her mother's genuine interest in who she was rather than what she accomplished. She had learned to wait for conversations that weren't debriefs about academic progress or behavioral goals. The waiting had created a kind of emotional holding pattern in Emma's development. She had learned to defer her own needs and wants, to put her authentic self on hold until some future moment when it might be convenient or appropriate to express her real thoughts and feelings. She had learned to live in a state of perpetual preparation for connection that never quite arrived. Emma stirred slightly in her sleep, and Alexandra found herself remembering bedtime routines from years past, when Emma was smaller and they would read stories together, not because the books were educationally appropriate or aligned with reading-level objectives, but simply because Emma enjoyed them. When had bedtime stories become homework assignments? When had the peaceful transition to sleep become another opportunity for skill development rather than connection? The longing wasn't just Emma's, Alexandra realized. She had been waiting too, though she had disguised her waiting as productivity. She had been waiting for the right time to slow down, for the perfect moment when her business would be stable enough to allow for more family time. She had been waiting for Emma to get older and more independent so that parenting would become easier, more efficient, less disruptive to her professional obligations. She had been waiting for someday when the next quarter's results were in, someday when the current crisis was resolved, someday when the next promotion was secured. But someday never arrived because there was always another quarter, another crisis, another goal that demanded her immediate attention and promised future freedom that never materialized. Emma's waiting and Alexandra's waiting had created a terrible symmetry, both of them postponing authentic connection for a more convenient time that never came. Emma waited for her mother to be available, and Alexandra waited for her daughter to need less attention. They were both waiting for the other person to make space for relationship, while neither of them knew how to stop the cycle of deferral that had replaced actual intimacy. The most devastating aspect of the waiting was how it had taught Emma to minimize her own needs. She had learned not to ask for bedtime stories because she had learned that her mother was always too tired. She had learned not to share exciting news from school because she had learned that her mother was always too busy. She had learned not to seek comfort when she was scared because she had learned that her mother was always too stressed. Emma had become an expert at reading the subtle signals that indicated when her needs would be inconvenient, and she had learned to wait for better timing that rarely arrived. She had learned to be grateful for whatever attention she could get, whenever she could get it, rather than expecting the consistent, reliable presence that should be every child's birthright. Alexandra thought about Daniel in the stairwell, how he had been immediately available to Emma's distress without checking his watch or calculating the cost of stopping his work. He had demonstrated something that Alexandra had forgotten, that responding to a child's need shouldn't require waiting for the right moment. The right moment is always now, when the child needs you. The waiting had robbed both of them of the present moment. Emma had learned to live in anticipation of future connection, and Alexandra had learned to live in preparation for future availability. Neither of them had learned how to simply be together in the here and now, without agenda or optimization or improvement goals. As Emma's breathing deepened into genuine sleep, Alexandra made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She was done waiting. Done waiting for the right time to be present. Done waiting for Emma to need less attention. Done waiting for her business to reach some mythical state of self-sufficiency that would free her to be the mother Emma deserved. The waiting had to stop because childhood wouldn't wait. Emma's 8-year-old self, with all her current interests and fears and wonder, would never exist again. The opportunity to know this version of her daughter, to be present for this irreplaceable stage of her development, was disappearing one day at a time, while Alexandra waited for a more convenient season for motherhood. Sitting in that darkened room, watching her daughter sleep, Alexandra understood that the waiting itself had become the problem. It had taught them both that connection was a luxury to be scheduled, rather than a necessity to be prioritized. It had taught them both that love was something to be expressed when time allowed, rather than something to be lived in every ordinary moment. The waiting had to end because Emma was 8 years old right now, and she would never be 8 again. The breaking point came 3 days later, not with dramatic fanfare but with the quiet devastation of a child's complete emotional collapse during what should have been a routine morning. Alexandra was reviewing quarterly projections in her home office when she heard Emma's voice from the kitchen, not crying or yelling, but speaking to herself in a monotone that was somehow more alarming than any tantrum could have been. "It's okay, Emma, you can do this. Just breathe and do what you're supposed to do. It's okay that you feel scared. Just don't bother anyone with it." Alexandra found Emma standing in the middle of the kitchen, fully dressed in her school uniform, backpack perfectly organized, lunch neatly packed, and talking to herself like a therapist coaching a patient through a breakdown. She was literally parenting herself through a panic attack, using language she had clearly learned from Dr. Martinez to manage emotions that no 8-year-old should have to manage alone. "Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong?" Emma looked up with eyes that were simultaneously too young and too old. "Nothing's wrong, Mom. I just had some scared feelings about the math test today, but I'm using my coping strategies like Dr. Martinez taught me. See? I'm breathing deeply and reminding myself that I'm safe and that feelings pass." The clinical language coming from her 8-year-old daughter's mouth was perhaps the most heartbreaking thing Alexandra had ever heard. Emma had been so thoroughly trained to manage her emotional needs independently that she was literally providing her own therapy session in the kitchen while her mother worked in the next room. "What kind of scared feelings?" Alexandra asked, kneeling down to Emma's eye level, a gesture that felt both natural and foreign after months of conducting their conversations from standing positions while multitasking. "The kind where I can't remember anything I studied, and my chest feels tight, and I think about what will happen if I disappoint you by not getting an A," Emma said with the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a routine medical procedure. "But Dr. Martinez says these feelings are normal, and that I can manage them by remembering that my worth isn't determined by my grades." Alexandra felt the world tilt on its axis. Emma was having academic anxiety so severe that she needed therapeutic intervention, and the source of that anxiety was fear of disappointing her mother. Her 8-year-old daughter was carrying the weight of Alexandra's expectations like a boulder on her small shoulders, and she had learned to see this burden as normal, as something to be managed rather than removed. "Emma, do you know what I think about when you take tests at school?" Emma shook her head, clearly expecting another lesson about effort and preparation and doing your best. I think about how proud I am that you're brave enough to try new things. I think about how much I love your curiosity and the way you ask questions about everything. I think about how lucky I am to be your mom, no matter what grade you get on any test. Emma stared at her for a long moment, processing this information like it was delivered in a foreign language. But what if I get a B or a C? What if I'm not as smart as you need me to be? The question revealed the crisis in its full scope. Emma believed that her mother's love was conditional on her performance. She believed that her worth as a daughter was determined by her ability to achieve at levels that would reflect well on Alexandra's parenting. She believed that disappointing her mother academically would threaten their relationship fundamentally. Emma, listen to me very carefully, Alexandra said, taking her daughter's small hands in her own. There is nothing you could do, no grade you could get, no mistake you could make that would change how much I love you. You are not my daughter because you're smart. You're not valuable because you achieve things. You are precious to me because you exist, because you're you, because you're mine. Emma began to cry then. Not the controlled, quickly managed tears she had learned were appropriate, but the deep, body-shaking sobs of a child who had been holding in too much for too long. But I heard you tell Mrs. Patterson that you were proud of my report card. And I heard you tell Grandma about my violin recital. And when people ask about me, you always talk about my grades and my activities. Alexandra pulled Emma into her arms, feeling her daughter's small body trembling with the effort of containing emotions that had grown too large for an 8-year-old to manage alone. She realized that Emma had been listening to how Alexandra talked about her, and she had learned that her mother's pride was tied to her achievements rather than her existence. When had she stopped talking about Emma's sense of humor, her kindness to animals, her elaborate imaginary games? When had she started reducing her complex, wonderful daughter to a list of accomplishments designed to impress other adults? When had Emma learned that her authentic self was less valuable than her performed self? I'm proud of your grades because they show how hard you work, Alexandra said, but I'm more proud of how you help that new girl at school feel welcome. I'm proud of your violin playing because I love watching you create beautiful music, but I'm more proud of how gentle you are with our neighbor's cat. I love all the things you accomplish, but I love you more than any of those things. Emma's sobs began to quiet, but the crisis had revealed something that couldn't be solved with reassurance alone. The damage went deeper than academic anxiety or performance pressure. Emma had learned to see herself through the lens of productivity and achievement because that was the lens through which her mother consistently viewed her. I don't want to go to school today, Emma whispered. I don't want to take the test. I don't want to try to be perfect anymore. I'm tired, Mom. I'm so tired of trying to be good enough. The word tired hung in the air like an indictment. An 8-year-old should never be tired of trying to be good enough. An 8-year-old should feel inherently worthy, naturally loved, automatically accepted. The fact that Emma was exhausted by the effort of earning her place in the world revealed the complete failure of everything Alexandra had thought she was providing. The crisis point wasn't Emma's panic attack or her academic anxiety or even her precocious self-therapy session in the kitchen. The crisis point was the recognition that Alexandra had accidentally taught her daughter that love was something to be earned rather than something to be given freely, that acceptance was conditional rather than absolute, that her value as a person depended on her ability to perform rather than her simple existence as Emma. Standing in their kitchen, holding her sobbing daughter, Alexandra understood that this was the moment everything had to change. Not gradually, not when it was convenient, not after the next quarter or the next promotion or the next crisis was resolved. Now. Today. This moment. The system they had built was destroying them both, and it had to stop before there was nothing left of Emma's childhood to save. In the days following Emma's breakdown, Alexandra threw herself into solving the crisis with the same methodical intensity she applied to business problems, an approach that initially made everything worse before she realized she was trying to fix the symptoms while intensifying the disease. Her first instinct was to optimize Emma's schedule more efficiently. If academic pressure was causing anxiety, she would hire additional tutors to make learning easier. If Emma felt overwhelmed, she would research better time management techniques designed specifically for gifted children. If the current therapist wasn't providing adequate coping strategies, she would find a more highly credentialed specialist who understood high-achieving families. She spent her lunch break calling elite private schools in Seattle, convinced that Brightwater Academy's competitive environment was the source of Emma's stress. She researched alternative educational philosophies, interviewed admissions directors at progressive institutions, and even considered homeschooling options that would allow for more customized learning experiences. By Wednesday, she had compiled a comprehensive improvement plan, a new school with a more nurturing environment, a child psychologist who specialized in perfectionist anxiety, a reduced activity schedule that would still maintain Emma's competitive advantages, and a time management system that would allow Alexandra to be more efficiently present during their interactions. She presented this plan to Emma over dinner at their kitchen table, the first time they had eaten together at home in over a month, expecting relief or excitement about the positive changes coming to their lives. Instead, Emma listened with the polite attention she had learned to give to adult presentations, nodding at appropriate intervals and asking clarifying questions about logistics. When Alexandra finished outlining the comprehensive solution, Emma was quiet for a long moment before saying, "This sounds like a lot of work for you, Mom. Are you sure you have time for all these changes?" The response revealed everything wrong with Alexandra's approach. Emma was still trying to protect her mother from inconvenience, still operating under the assumption that her needs were burdens to be managed rather than relationships to be nurtured. The comprehensive improvement plan was still treating Emma as a problem to be solved rather than a daughter to be loved. "What would you want to change if you could change anything?" Alexandra asked, abandoning her carefully researched presentation. "I would want to not have to want things," Emma said, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through every educational philosophy and therapeutic intervention Alexandra had researched. "I would want to not hope for things that might not happen. I would want to not need you to be different, because then I wouldn't be disappointed when you can't be different." The devastating honesty of Emma's response exposed the fundamental flaw in Alexandra's fix-it approach. Emma had learned to protect herself from disappointment by minimizing her expectations, by not wanting anything her mother couldn't easily provide. She had learned to be grateful for whatever attention she received, rather than expecting the consistent presence she actually needed. Alexandra's solution-oriented mindset was treating their relationship like a business problem: identify inefficiencies, allocate better resources, implement improved systems. But relationships weren't business problems. They couldn't be optimized or systematized or improved through better resource allocation. They required something much simpler and much more difficult than strategic planning. They required presence. The misguided attempts continued for several more days. Alexandra bought books about work-life balance and parenting strategies for busy professionals. She downloaded apps designed to help working mothers maximize quality time with their children. She scheduled consultation calls with family therapists who specialized in helping high-achieving parents reconnect with their children. Each solution was sophisticated, well-researched, and completely missing the point. The breakthrough came when Emma got sick with a simple fever, nothing serious, just the kind of ordinary childhood illness that required someone to stay home and provide basic comfort. Alexandra's instinct was to call the nanny service for emergency coverage so she wouldn't have to miss her morning meetings. But as she reached for her phone, something in Emma's feverish expression stopped her. Emma wasn't asking her to stay. She wasn't even expecting her to stay. She was already preparing for another adult to provide care, while her mother handled more important responsibilities. The resignation in her daughter's eyes was more devastating than any tantrum or pleading could have been. "I'm staying home with you today," Alexandra announced, surprising them both. "But don't you have important meetings?" Emma asked, clearly confused by this departure from established priorities. "You're my most important meeting," Alexandra said, and for the first time in months, she saw genuine surprise in Emma's eyes, as if the possibility that she could be her mother's highest priority was so foreign it hadn't occurred to her. They spent the day on the couch together, Emma napping against Alexandra's shoulder while old movies played in the background. No educational content, no improvement objectives, no strategic parenting goals. Just a mother being present while her daughter was sick, available for whatever small comforts a feverish 8-year-old might need. It was the most productive day Alexandra had experienced in years, though she accomplished nothing that could be measured in any conventional sense. She learned that Emma liked to have her back rubbed in small circles when she wasn't feeling well. She discovered that Emma still remembered the words to songs they used to sing together. She found out that Emma had been having dreams about flying, and that she wondered whether birds ever got tired of being in the sky. The misguided attempts had all focused on changing external circumstances, better schools, different schedules, improved systems, But what Emma actually needed couldn't be researched or purchased or optimized. She needed her mother to simply be present, available, and interested in her inner world rather than her outer performance. The solution wasn't better resource allocation. It was a complete reorientation of priorities that put relationship before achievement, presence before productivity, and love before accomplishment. It wasn't a strategy to be implemented, it was a way of being to be embraced. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it began with a single decision that felt both revolutionary and surprisingly simple. Alexandra chose to be present. Not perfectly present, not strategically present, not efficiently present, just present, with all the messy imperfection that genuine availability required. It started the morning after Emma's fever broke, when Alexandra did something she hadn't done in over 2 years. She sat down at the breakfast table without her phone, her laptop, or her mental checklist of the day's objectives. She sat down with the radical intention of sharing a meal with her daughter and giving Emma her complete, undivided attention. "How did you sleep?" Alexandra asked, a question that seemed ordinary but felt revolutionary because she asked it while actually looking at Emma's face, actually waiting for and listening to the answer, actually caring about the response for its own sake rather than as information to be efficiently processed. Emma looked surprised by the question, not because it was unusual, but because her mother was clearly waiting for a real answer rather than a quick status update. "I had a dream about the song Daniel taught me," Emma said tentatively. "In the dream, we were singing it together, but with new words about all the things that make me happy." In the past, Alexandra would have responded with something productive, encouragement about Emma's creativity, suggestions for turning the dream into a songwriting exercise, praise for her imagination that somehow included goals for further development. Instead, she found herself simply curious about her daughter's inner world. "What were some of the happy things in your song?" she asked. Emma's face lit up with the kind of unguarded joy that Alexandra realized she hadn't seen in months. "Pancakes shaped like stars, and the way our cat purrs when he's sleeping in the sunshine, and the feeling when you finally understand something that was confusing before. And," she hesitated as if testing whether this level of authenticity was really welcome. "And what?" "And mothers who have time to listen to dreams about songs." The simple statement contained everything that had been missing and everything that needed to be restored. Emma wasn't asking for more activities or better opportunities or improved circumstances. She was asking for a mother who had space in her life for dreams about songs, for conversations that served no purpose other than connection, for the kind of unhurried presence that made a child feel worthy of attention simply because she existed. That morning, Alexandra made a series of decisions that felt terrifying in their simplicity. She called her assistant and cleared her calendar for the entire day. She turned off her phone's work notifications. She canceled Emma's Mandarin lesson, her violin practice, and her academic tutoring session. For the first time in either of their memories, they had a completely unscheduled day ahead of them. "What should we do with a whole day of nothing planned?" Alexandra asked Emma, genuinely curious about what her daughter would choose if given complete freedom. Emma was quiet for a long time, clearly unused to being asked such an open-ended question. Finally, she said, "Could we make pancakes shaped like stars? And then maybe, could we just see what happens next?" They spent the morning in the kitchen, making imperfect star-shaped pancakes, and discovering that Emma was naturally funny when she wasn't worried about being appropriate. They spent the afternoon in the backyard, lying on a blanket, and finding animal shapes in clouds, an activity that served no educational purpose, but filled Emma with the kind of wonder that no amount of structured enrichment had ever provided. Emma taught Alexandra the harmony Daniel had shown her for "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," and they sang it together while washing dishes, their voices blending in the kitchen in a way that felt both new and familiar. They built a blanket fort in the living room, not because it was a recommended bonding activity, but because Emma had always wanted to, and had never felt like she could ask. As the day progressed, Alexandra watched Emma gradually relax into a version of herself that had been hidden beneath layers of performance and achievement pressure. This Emma was sillier, more curious, more openly affectionate. This Emma asked questions because she was genuinely interested in the answers, not because she was supposed to demonstrate intellectual engagement. This Emma laughed at her own jokes, made up nonsense songs, and seemed to take up more space in the world rather than trying to minimize her presence. But the true solution wasn't just about unscheduled time or undivided attention, Alexandra realized. It was about fundamentally redefining success in terms that included her daughter's emotional well-being, authentic self-expression, and simple happiness. It was about choosing to measure her worth as a mother, not by Emma's achievements, but by Emma's sense of being unconditionally loved. The phone calls she didn't take that day, the meetings she didn't attend, the deals she didn't close, none of it mattered compared to the sound of Emma's unguarded laughter, the feeling of her daughter's complete trust, the knowledge that for one entire day, Emma had felt like the most important thing in her mother's world because she was. That evening, as Alexandra tucked Emma into bed, a ritual she committed to reclaiming as her own rather than delegating to others, Emma said something that crystallized the true solution in perfect clarity. "Mom, today felt like the song Daniel taught me, like everything was twinkling and bright and beautiful, even the ordinary things. Like we were seeing each other clearly for the first time." The true solution wasn't complex or sophisticated or requiring expert consultation. It was choosing to see Emma clearly, not as a project to be optimized or a reflection of Alexandra's parenting success, but as a unique, wonderful person, worthy of love, attention, and presence, simply because she was Emma. It was choosing to twinkle together, to be present for the ordinary moments that made up a childhood, to prioritize connection over achievement and relationship over productivity. It was understanding that the most successful thing Alexandra could do was ensure that Emma felt loved, seen, and valued for exactly who she was right now, not for who she might become or what she might achieve. The lullaby Daniel had sung in the stairwell had revealed what Alexandra had forgotten, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer another person is simply your complete presence, your genuine attention, and your unconditional acceptance. That was the solution Emma had needed all along, and it was the solution that would transform both of their lives. One present moment, one shared song, one ordinary miracle at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.